Hello everyone, my name is Stéphanie Laronde. I am the Director for International Relations at the International Network of Basin Organizations. We are delighted to welcome you for this series of webinars. This one will be the fourth one. In July we had the first one on IWRM as a factor for resilience to crisis. In September we had another webinar on water information systems. And in October we had a webinar on adaptation to climate change, the cost of the measures versus the cost of inaction. For this fourth edition we organized this webinar in partnership with the International Secretariat for Water for the participation of stakeholders in basin management. Here is a quick introduction on the different experiences of the International Office for Water and INBO. We have learned that participatory basin management is a real toolbox to improve governance between institutions and in order to tackle the lack of human resources. It's a goal, of course, for consultation, but it's also a source of effectiveness to involve all of the users in water resources management.
So most of the times, participatory bodies at basin management or basins are extraordinary places for water interconnection and matching, bringing together environmental associations, water users, water stakeholders. So bringing together this diversity of stakeholders opens the path to practical and concrete solutions. The participatory management is one of the main important aspects of integrated water management at basin level. The planning should involve all the players and all the end users. Is not only a good democratic governance approach, but an effectiveness argument from the economic, social, and environmental aspect to move to a sectorial to an integrated management. I therefore propose to share with you with our 5 panelists some experiences conducted in the implementation of the integrated resources management that INBO and the Water Association has been coaching and supporting in a very specific framework, and that we had to adapt this participatory management approach in different contexts. The first example was in China, where advisory boards and consultative groups were put in place as a pilot experience represented by different representatives of different ministries of water, of agriculture, and all the administrative departments. The idea was to bring them all at basin level. And here, the participatory management allowed to mobilize the institutional players to ease the mutual knowledge and knowledge sharing and really reach a good and very sound articulation between different ministries that didn't used to talk to each other before. So here, what really happened is a cultural mind shift and a cultural change happening. The other example, and here, if I may, I'm talking about the EU experience with the 6th country of the Oriental Partnership in the framework of the OI plus countries. And here I have listed on the slide several achievements. And I just wanted to draw your attention on the awareness raising programs towards youth and rural populations, and through the different awareness raising campaigns of participatory management has allowed not only the dialogue, but also the territorial expression and full transparency. Another important example is in Brazil. The law on water of 1997, inspired by the French experience, proposes a water resources management that is fully decentralized and participatory by hydrographic basin, based on the participation of public players, end users, and local communities. And finally, a last example is the Burkina Faso one, with this very important integrated resources management approach based on a participatory approach management approach, with the creation of the first water agency in Burkina Faso in 2007. 5 agencies were created in Burkina, and the Basin Committee is made of a state representative, local collectivities, and users categories. So in Burkina Faso, as well as in Brazil, the funding and financing of water agencies lies primarily on the uh, pollutant and users and an intaker kind of principle, which made entering the users as a real player and real actor. So we're going to be listening with very tangible examples, thanks to our panelists, how countries and river organizations and basin organizations organize to make sure that all participants are involved and stakeholders are involved in the governance and participatory approach, and how we can really make sure they are fully involved. So before giving the floor to Isabelle Matykowski, Isabelle Matykowski, the water agency in France, you will have a look at a participatory approach example, and you should be seeing in your screen 3 questions. So please feel free to write down or to show this poll on your screen, and then scroll to really visualize the 3 questions. So you are free to answer to this first poll. There are 3 questions for question number 2. You should actually respond by default to the question. You click and write down your answer in the chat, and feel free to click on the answer, and then you answer to question number 3. Please feel free to submit your answer, and then you answer in the chat to question 2 to give the word that is associated, according to you, to participatory approach or participatory management. So please, you submit this question, you file a questionnaire, and then respond in the chat to question 2 by giving a word that associates the participatory management approach. In the meantime, I will give the floor, and I will delete my screen sharing, and I will give the floor to Isabelle Matykowski, who will be explaining how the stakeholder participation involvement is concretized and really materialized in the French way. You have the floor. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see the screen I have just shared. First of all, I wanted to thank all the organizers for allowing me to take part in the seminar. I will be splitting my presentation in 2 parts. The first one on the participatory approach management of basin organizations that are led by water agencies. And a second part on youth, and that is very specific to the water agency policy.
Dans notre réseau, un petit rappel de la gestion française par bassin.
So just a quick reminder of the basin organization that have been going on for 50 years. It's based on the law on water of 1964. It's based on 3 pillars. A pillar that is close to the source, and that really brings together coordination of players. And this really brings the notion of the 5 hydrographic agencies of France and basins of France and the 5 water agencies. The second principle, or the second pillar, is the promotion of culture of basin and solidarity on the issue of user, polluter, and intaker. The third pillar of this water agency approach is the promotion of a water democracy, both in terms of awareness raising, participation, etc. So concretely, how do things evolve in France? As a matter of fact, in water agencies bodies in general, we have the equivalent of a water parliament.
The principles of water agencies, most particularly the water parliament, that has 3 specific roles: a role on the strategy and the sharing of challenges by the design and a follow-up. on the water planning scheme, a body that relates to the executive agencies and its board of directors, but the Parliament of Water also has a guiding role for the financial activities of agency by approving its capacity to put in place a certain of action with partners of water agencies on the field in order to progress towards shared challenges of water. And this very Parliament of Water and its composition and its democratic component is comprised of elected staff and representatives of the state. How is that being done? I now give you the composition as will be implemented at the beginning of 2021. Since there have been important evolutions in the composition of the basin committees and of our water parliaments, including with a strong evolution on the representativity of non-economic and economic water users. I will show you later the evolution that we have had. And another important point also is a very strong willingness that has been approved at the very early week by the ASAP law, certification and simplification, and which has highlighted the parity by group of representatives of the different water parliaments. And for having lived that directly, it's not a piece of cake or an easy thing to have that from the agriculture industry and users association, environment protection association, a parity that was wished for, and a equivalent proportion was sent between the non-economic water users and the economic water users. The evolutions that we are now going through today, since today we are talking about the composition that you see to the left-hand side of your screen or slide. We had a users panel that was not totally equitable and equal between the economic and non-economic users of waters, because the economic water users did not represent 2/3, but almost 2/3 of the group of users. Here will be 50-50 representation. And another important point having to do mostly with the Artois Picardie Water Agency is that in our non-economic water uses, we did propose to the prefect of, and it's almost done, the fact of including a young person, and that will be a good segue to the second part of my presentation. Now this participation is also broken down at a territorial level, since on the Picardie basin we have 15 territories of the SAGE. These are water basin territories at an infra-basin level, and which also makes it possible to define this willingness of small water parliaments at this territory scale. And I was talking about the water development management plan. Now these water parliaments, small water parliaments, are comprised of about 15 members, which is, if we multiply quickly, we are about 750 persons who are directly sensitized to the topic of water in the Picardie River Basin. And if we add the members of the Basin Committee, we will be reaching out to about 1,000 persons or people, which is relatively modest indeed. But it was modest for a basin of 4.8 million people or inhabitants. This is why within the framework of as of 2020-21, within the framework of the consultations we are going to have on the water strategy, water development management master plan for the period 2022-2027, we wished to start a very wide consultation with the public to go further than what we wanted at the beginning, and to also be as close as possible to the territories' concerns, with the possibility of territorialization of policies and include all of the citizens. So this is going to, in a couple of examples, will be made with mass consultations, simple, on the basis of one question from tele-reports that are very short, of 2 minutes, 10 length, to be very concrete and direct on the subject of water challenges in the territory. That will also allow us to have a digital register, a record, to have more in-depth activities, a poll for the scientific measures of opinion, and also propositions of a citizens jury. These are some of the measures that I wanted to highlight without really going any further, because time is of the essence. Now, to zoom on the young public, this is one particularity of the Artois-Picardie Water Agency, to have developed this policy within the mode of operation. Maybe to scope this within context, we have also a panel which is very small, with less than 20 years of age, and mostly those who are living in countries failing or with less water. And the Picardie Basin, we have the peculiarity to be the youngest region in France, with about 13% of inhabitants that are less than 25 years of age. We are not in the same ratio, but in France we have that peculiarity, with 2 international districts, and in the ESCO committee we have observations of youth persons since 2003, which is not the case in the other international commission. How did we create this policy for the youth? How did we do that? It took us 10 years to do so. It is different from the environmental education policy, with my explanations on the screen, you will understand. And the willingness at the beginning was materialized by the setup of a basin pedagogical committee since the year 2000 that has integrated national education, agricultural education, a representative of the environment education structures, and an elected of the River Basin Committee, the objective being to raise the awareness and to work with the education world, which is quite targeted and which is not addressing the public consultation aspects. And the objective is exactly to incite them, to spur them to talk about these topics. It has made progress in 2003 with the signing of the Eco-Citizens Charter signature, which was the prelude to our Parliament of Youth for Water. Since we have worked with, in this charter, we have worked to set up a first Youth for Water Parliament in 2003 that was comprised of about 50 participants, which was meeting 3 times a year. And in 2008, we have made progress by signing a charter in Antwerp to officialize the Parliament of the Young Citizens of the ESCO. And we were in a European, or in the Scheldt River, with the Flemish and Belgian authorities in order to set up at the Scheldt, the river, a parliament of young person whose management was entrusted to an NGO. Now we have also scaled up. We have scaled up and a bigger dimension to participate in the European Parliament and the World Parliament for Water, Youth for Water. And the Water Agency was the spokesperson and the technical guarantor for the structuring of these parliaments' activities. As I was saying, this is a 10-year policy that was set up, which made it possible to, in the first phase to really reach about 1,000 or so young people, and it has continued over the decade spanning 2010-2020. The upscaling or the upsizing of these 4 parliaments of water managements for youth parliaments for the Shelt and the World Water Parliament, it was a contribution of about 100,000 euros at a 10-year, that is to say 1 million per year, directly including the public and young persons and mostly young adults. And today we are finalizing our policy since we since the beginning of 2021, we are going to appoint directly in the Basin Committee a young person for the water in the direct agencies in the Artois Picardie. The diagram that I suggested to you gives in the diagonal from left to right, upper part, that gives the element contained in these activities, and in the other diagonal, the fact that our actions of institutional cooperation, be it in Morocco with the Cebu River or in Bulgaria, we are also exhorting the valorization of the place of a young person in the water dialogue. Thank you. Thank you, Isabelle, for this enriching presentation.
You still have a few seconds to complete the first poll, and I am pleased to welcome our 4 great witnesses who will give us the pleasure to share their own experiences.
Now, Mr. Jean-Bosco Bazié, expert at Oville International at Burkina Faso, not from Burkina, from Thiès in Senegal, exceptionally. Mr. Jaime Ortiz, Vice Minister of Water at the Ministry of Water in Ecuador. If we can see you and say hello to you. Mrs. Bota Sharipova, in charge of the scepter of the World Parliament for Water. Bota, hello. And Mr. Vladimir Arana, Program Coordinator at the Water Secretariat based in Canada. Hello, Vladimir.
These 4 panelists will make a presentation, but just before that, we maintain our strong focus on participatory approach. So we have a second poll for you with 3 separate questions, which we invite you all to answer. We will make a synthesis of your replies, and during the intervention of our panelists, if you have any questions, we invite you to share them in the chat. We will have a time dedicated to question and answers after this panel on participatory management. It will be Madame Laurie Fourneau from the International Secretariat for Water who will moderate these questions and the discussions that will follow.
I will stop sharing the screen, and I will be sending this roundtable. I give the floor to Jean-Paul Basile, and he's going to be telling us what are the conditions to be met for a effective and efficient participatory management and involvement of the local collectivities and local population for a sound participatory management. So Jean-Bosco, you have the floor. That share the water resources and transboundary resources to help them come up with a participatory process of local actors, stakeholders, upstream and downstream end users and natural resources of the Niger River, and involve them in the different decision-making processes. But it took actually a very high level decision-making processes at the state level, who really shared a vision on 3 main activities and pillars: participation of local activities and sharing knowledge and capacity building. And among these actors, there were end users at the lowest end and lowest level of the basin, at the field level of the basin. So this means that when you have a strong political will things really happen? And in order to make things happen is to first recognize and acknowledge these players and actors as real stakeholders. And that was the first major step made. Once they are acknowledged as such, and they need to be identified. What is their profile? What is it that they do? Who are they? What is their weight in the basin organizations, and what are their negative impacts on the water and the basin resources and the degradation of those resources? What are their priorities? What are their needs? And how can we actually ease and strengthen and enhance their participation in the development process? So after the acknowledgement and knowledge and identification of these stakeholders, so the action consisted in designing and supporting a participatory approach. And this led to a study that really characterized and mapped the different actors and players, fishermen, breeders, forestmen, all farmers and all group of populations that are in the field and share the water resources. And as you know, whenever there is a sharing, there is a risk of conflict. And then a regional forum was organized of the 9 basin organizations and countries where all the actors were invited to come up with a common vision and in terms of participatory mechanism to the decision-making process around the Niger River. So this forum that brought together over 200 participants coming from the 9 national agencies or basin agencies of the basin really paved the way for the creation of 2 decision-making mechanism or participatory mechanism at 2 levels. So first, identifying the first local players, putting them in interface with the ministry in charge of water, of environment, and also the supervising ministry in terms of supervision in the country, but also all other steering committees or pilot committees that were set up in each of the countries. And at regional level, we had the Secretariat, Executive Secretary, that is steering and leading body of all the 9 basin organizations, as well as technical and financial partners and the steering committee. So all this in order to acknowledge officially the participation of end users and invite them to sit on in all the decision-making organizations and committees of the basin, permanent standing committees, technical committees, and allow them to take part to the statutory meetings and technical meetings of the basin organizations, which has not been the case or was not the case since the creation of the Niger Basin Organization until the 1980s. So this did not exist. And the institutionalization of this mechanism that was acknowledged and recognized by a decision of a Council of Ministers of the Basin Organization really led to take on board the life and needs of the end users and the sustainable development of the region, the water charter, the investment program, as well as other major projects covering all the countries surrounding the basin, the Niger Basin organizations. So this is how this experience was led. And of course, we still have some challenges, but a lot of lessons were learned. And the first lesson, these field actors are really preoccupied and concerned by priority actions in terms of water services, education, health services, and for which the participatory notion is like a waste of time. So how do you want the people to attend high-level meetings and sometimes very technical meetings and scientific meetings without them understanding anything? How do you want them to really be involved and be interested when their first concerns and first needs are overlooked? And because what they need is the universal access to drinking water and basic access to drinking water. And basin organizations and basin agencies are useless if they don't meet the needs of the local population. There were also leadership conflicts and this had an impact on the participation of these actors and players. And of course, the lack of technical assistance, because these populations still need to be backed and coached and assisted to better understand the scientific and environmental dimensions and drawback. And this experience led us to the Senegal River by using communication tools. And this allowed the different players at local level to better understand, gain a better knowledge on how the stakes were played and how they could really influence the decision-making. And this is what we have tried to showcase by a box of images and animation trainings through radios and community radios, allowing the communities and population in the very remotest areas of the Senegal River to really understand sustainable development challenges of their basins and the decisions that are made at the basin level. These are, in a nutshell, the two experiences that we were conducting in the two basin organizations in Western Africa. Thank you very much. And what I still understand from your intervention is that really it shows the complexity of the participatory management approach when it is not a tradition out there, and that it really takes a very high political will. And also the cost of these interventions will be addressed during the exchanges and debates. I will now give the floor to Jaime Ortiz. We're going to be changing continents. Good morning to Raiz. What is the experience of the Equator in the implementation of joint work with the social participation organizations in the development of the water management approach and water resources management approach?
Hello everyone, it's a real pleasure to be with you. I wanted to send you greetings from the Ministry of Water and Environment of Ecuador. We really welcome this initiative, which allows us to exchange experiences, enrich each other, and also be able to reap benefits for water users in our respective countries. To start my presentation on the governance of water resources in Ecuador, I wanted to mention the experience that was carried out in our country with the new constitution that was established back in 2008. This constitution recognizes the human right to water and strengthens the establishment of integrated water resource management, IWRM. Our laws and legal regulations prohibit the privatization of water, and the only way we can manage water in Ecuador is through public management. This can be done by municipal, provincial or community authorities under supervision, regulation and control of the Ecuadorian state.
This is how we basically stipulate an order for the provision of the water resources. We have first and foremost the human consumption, second irrigation for food use. Then we have what we call the ecologic flow for the preservation of the ecosystems, of the water resources in the actual ecosystems. And finally, we have the productive activities. These systems for community and public management has allowed for the indigenous, rural and peasant population to be part of a sustainable process, as I said earlier, which allows the state to regulate, to administer and manage water resources, but also provide water to the most needed sector. I would like now to tell you about the different spaces for participation in integrated water resources management. I would like to highlight this integrated management. Before the current way of working, we had a very vertical way of managing water. Now we want to have a more horizontal management with participation of all the actors involved and the accompaniment of the state. That's why we have what we call the human consumption, the irrigation and productive activities. Then we have what we call basin councils. These are for local water resource planning, and the intercultural and plurinational water councils. I will tell you more about these in detail later on. And this takes us to that intercultural and plurinational water. This is part of the Article 25 of the Water Act of Ecuador. We have a first space then. This is what we call the basis, the composition of a basin council based on local activities, and it has 7 participants. This is the first space, the first jurisdiction, and it would be equivalent to the provinces in many other countries. And it is made up by 7 representatives, 1 from the productive sector, related to the energy production sector, industry sector, etc. Then another representative from the drinking water agencies in charge of providing drinking water to the population. We have what we call the irrigation councils for agricultural use, everything related to irrigation. Then we have a representative from the decentralized provincial autonomous government, what we called prefectures before. Another representative from the municipal decentralized autonomous government, i.e. the councils, municipal councils. Then we had the parish decentralized autonomous government. This is the smaller self-governed body, and 1 representative from the universities or polytechnic high schools. These 7 representatives made up the basin council based on the local hydrographic planning unit. Which is the first space for these actors, as I said. Then we have a broader aspect, if you like. This is what we call the basin council based on hydrographic demarcation or region, and it is made up by the 7 representatives that we mentioned earlier, plus 2, 1 from the National Environmental Authority, in this case the Ministry of Environment and Water, which is the ministry that's competent for water management across the nation, and then 1 representative from the Irrigation Secretary, which again add to the former 7 participants to make the council, the basin council, based on hydrographical region. Then we have the space of participation in integrated water resources management. And I would like to highlight now the composition of the Intercultural and Plurinational Water Council. Just a few months ago, we finished a fusion of what we called before the Ministry of the Environment on the one hand and the Water Secretary on the other hand. However, for the integrated water resources management, we continue to work with the hydrographical demarcations or regions for the different councils. So we kept this division, which is different from the ones we use for other aspects in Ecuador, based on what we call the hydrographical regions that we have been working together with the Water Secretary. So we have reached the Intercultural and Plurinational Water Council. This is managed by the representative from the productive sector, another one from the Drinking Water Council, another one from the Irrigation Council, 3 representatives from peoples and nationalities, and this is important. This is what we mean by plurinational. We have a representative from the indigenous, another one from the Afro-Equatorian sector of the population, and another one from the Montubio sector of the population. Then we have a representative from the consumers organizations of public services. This is part of the Consumer Act. And then we have 3 representatives from decentralized autonomous governments. These can be from, well, parishes, cantons or provinces. And finally, we have a representative from universities or polytechnical schools with different training and education bodies. I would like now to share the experience of a local hydrographic planning unit, that of Rio Porto Viejo, in the Manabí province, where I am located today. And I would like to highlight this experience as a type of experience that will be reduplicated elsewhere in the country, since it was really successful and it reached the objective that we wanted to reach. I talked about a horizontal relationship in the management of water resources, and this is something that was clear in this space in Puerto Viejo, Manabí. We started this initiative in 2006 when the coordinating body of strategic sectors and the French embassy to Ecuador started a project for water management, and we worked on together with the water secretary, the former Senagua, also the Adour-Garonne agency from France, and the International Office of Water, OI Water, and whose members are here with us today. We worked on 3 different axes of work: water governance, water resource planning, methodological proposals, information systems for local hydrographic planning units, and sustainable financial mechanisms in order to guarantee and to ensure the quality and availability of water resources, even in remote areas, better management of water resources, and a treatment of water in order to maximize the water that has already been used elsewhere. So we have the participation of 3 different actors from 3 different cantons, Santana, Puerto Viejo, and Rocapuerto, who worked together in one single working plan. So they aligned their working plans in order to achieve the objectives proposed at the local hydrographic planning unit. This was highly successful, and again, it will be reduplicated elsewhere in the country. We have learned several lessons from all this. I would like to start by highlighting the political will across all levels, from the maximum water authority down to those who manage water resources in rural and local areas. There was a true synergy which has allowed us to achieve our objectives. Not so far ago, we lived through a pandemic where, you may remember, we were obliged to be locked down for several weeks, particularly in Ecuador. However, there was a sector that never stopped across the world, and that was the agricultural sector. And as we understood this, we want to ensure the provision of water in quality and in quantity enough for that sector that helped everyone who was locked down. So it was important to have political will, as I said, from the highest level, from the decentralized governments to the administrators and presidents of the different water agencies. Then we worked with technical teams who were trained and skilled to perform accompaniment plans, and they brought these plans to all the competencies and all the areas. The effective participation, which allows for the attainment of objectives and common visions, for collective integration. This is an integrated and integral plan that allows for a good use of water resources in rural areas. Then we have the sense of belonging and empowerment. This is, as I said, a vertical relationship that did not generate the empowerment of those actors. Today, these actors are active, they are empowered, they can manage their water resources together with the state. So this means that in a way they feel that this is part of them, they look after this resource and they improve the management of this resource, and this allows us in turn to have a sustainable plan for the management of water resources. And here we can also include the municipal and provincial teams that in many different ways they have also accompanied and cooperated for a collective work. These collective schemes, these community initiatives, it is better for them to be small, a small scale, because they allow for the participation of the different actors in the different territories. It is easier to administer, to manage these programs in a better way when you don't have a large scope for action. Participation is also very much dependent on the existence of mechanisms or spaces which are legitimate, so it is themselves who manage in their different assemblies and they determine the way they are going to work around it. And finally, we have the participation of the youth and women in the management of water resources at the community level. We have seen, particularly in my country, that women participation from rural areas as something which is really transcendental, really fundamental. They live there day after day, and it is the youth and the women who participated the most actively in our experiences, taking the lead in many occasions and providing really effective and successful steps in these spaces. So I would like to highlight this because it was really important as a method for social integration in many communities. Despite they live in the different physical space, they were not really united beyond being from the same parish or community, but when we had the need to create an irrigation group or a water management group, this made everybody in that community converge, come together and work for the construction of new resources and management. So this is all from the Equatorian side. Thank you for the invitation, and we are here to provide and to learn from other experiences for the benefit of constructing and building an improved management program worldwide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ortiz. I noticed the participation within the framework of the Water Act of all the communication uses until the river basins, until the intercultural and multi-annual Council of Waters. We would like and thank you for your presentation. We would like now to give the floor to Mrs. Sharipova. She is going to talk to us about how the youth of Central Asian countries have initiated the activities of the water management in their countries and what are the challenges they are confronted.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot for inviting me to this panel. I would like to tell you today in my presentation about youth participation in the River Basin Council in the case of the RLC Basin countries, which I'm from. And my region, countries of the RLC Basin, are sadly known for the RLC Basin catastrophe, when the fourth biggest sea in the world, which lost 90% of its surface area in just 50 years because of the intensive agriculture and using of water for cotton production. Countries of the RLC Basin, there are 6 countries, and 5 of them used to be part of Soviet Union. That's Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And the 6th country is Afghanistan. And there are countries of the basin are at the different stages of their transition to IWRM, with the most advanced one being Kazakhstan, with the last 20 years with the development of its basin inspection, basin councils, and civil society participation. And also Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan having their basin units or basin areas established, and with Turkmenistan developing their national roadmap for transition to IWRM. And what I would like to tell in more details is about youth participation after 2017, when there was a youth workshop for the RLC Basin organized by International Secretariat for Water with the support of Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation 2017. Me with my peers from the region and especially from Kazakhstan, we decided to ask and we wanted to participate in river basin councils and also to share our research and maybe to comment and provide our recommendation in basin management. And in September of 2017, we participated in Aral Sea, in Sardegna Aral Basin Council in Kazakhstan. And after that, in 2018, we traveled as members of the World Youth Parliament for Water. We traveled to Brazil and participated in World Water Forum 8. And there we learned from the experience of Artois Picardier Water Agency and youth participation in the management of the basin there. And we were so much inspired and excited also to have a similar format of youth participation in our region. And therefore, we started cooperation with the Central Asian Youth for Water Network and decided to work together towards formal inclusion of youth in the decision-making on the basin level in our countries of Central Asia. And we wanted to do that in order to benefit to both sides, to help decision makers of the basin, because youth can bring some innovative, interesting solutions, and also to ensure more smooth transfer between generations from the one side, and on the other side, we wanted also to help young people in developing their scientific and practical working skills, because they could present their research that would help them to develop their network, maybe to find some future internship or employment opportunities. And also maybe they would get some feedback from the practitioners on their research. And we started this process in Kazakhstan, for example. Youth participated in 2017, 19, and 2020. That was irregular. For Kyrgyzstan, we got official permission from the respective state agency to participate in basin councils. In Tajikistan, 2019, youth participated in 2 meetings of basin councils, basin dialogues. But what I would like to highlight is that it is not a smooth and easy process, especially in the Central Asian states, because there are quite a number of barriers and shortcomings. What I would like to highlight is that in our countries we don't have full democracies, and therefore sometimes civil society movements are perceived radically by governments. Also, we have a highly hierarchical society, and we respect our elders, and this is part of our culture, and therefore sometimes youth are not expressing that much of enthusiasm and their own initiatives, but they are more reluctant and waiting for initiatives coming from the top. And we're also post-Soviet countries. So, and the feature which we have in post-Soviet countries is that there is a low interest of young people to participate in political social processes. And then, there are also some issues which are associated with the basin management, also with the basin councils, for example, that although formally established in some countries, basin councils are not fully functional. And also there are sometimes low commitment of governments. Basin council meetings are sometimes highly dependent on the donor support, on the international development partners funding to be conducted. And also networking is quite a new phenomena in the region, and there are quite weak connections between people and between institutions. And also when we speak about youth participation and the youth network, we should remember that that this is a volunteering activity, and therefore it is not always very active. And regarding youth networks, we can say that the members of the network is always changing, and we should always coach and train new people who come and explain them the idea of this and build the capacities. And therefore, as a conclusion, I would like to say that in the countries of Central Asia, there is an emerging interest of young people to participate in basin management, in river basin councils, as an example. But still, there are quite a lot of barriers which hinder the process, and it is not always easy for us to overcome these barriers. And also we should not, we think that we should not also underestimate the importance of exchange and learning from the examples of other basins, from inspiration also which we receive from examples of other youth from other basins. And also about the capacities, that it is important also to build the capacities of young people so that they are better aware and about and that they can be more active and participate in the management of their basins. Thanks a lot, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Merci beaucoup, Bota Sharipova. On a bien souligné.
Sharipova. We have highlighted the importance of the inclusion of the youth in the decision-making process, and you have shown which promote the integration of based on voluntarism. I now will give the floor to Mr. Vladimir Arana, who is based in Canada, who will talk to us about how the local communities can contribute more efficiently to basin management. Vladimir, you can share your screen. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Stéphanie. Well, yes, I'll try to go fast. What we're going to talk about now is an experience we've been developing in South America, basically in the Andes of Peru. And there are many reasons why we decided to do what we were doing and how and why we're upscaling the experience too. So one of the first phenomena we noticed, not only in the region in Latin America, but also in other regions, is that people are abandoning water sources. And we can see that through the concentration of population now and the localization of water sources, and also how the urbanized world is growing in all the continents. But the other thing is that also climate change is accelerating strongly and faster the access to water sources, and is creating also losses in income. But this is very critical, especially in those countries that have no access to water supply and sanitation, because if we analyze the relationship of access to water supply and sanitation to income, we see that there is an important correlation coefficient, as we can see in these drawings. So there are important water governance weaknesses in developing countries that we notice not only in Latin America, but also in other regions, is that the fact that basin management is mainly led by central governments creates problems in implementations and creates weaknesses in implementation of these measures at the local level or through the community level. The other thing is that there's a government's absence in developing countries, especially where water sources are located, because they are usually in rural areas and deep, far away rural areas, and people are now trying to concentrate in urban areas. That's what is happening. And the other thing is that there are compartmentalized decision making. So there is the fact that water decisions are spread in different ministries or in governments makes that decisions for water are also weak and not mainstreamed. Another tip also, disintegration is the vertical disintegration, where national, regional, local, and community levels are not coordinating their actions. And that creates, let us say, a perverse scenario where participation of youth or civil society is also weak. So the question is, how can we ensure the resilience of water resources in a context of strong government absence, and considering, the social, critical, environmental degradation, people's wealth, this accelerated migration from rural areas, etc., and which is also critical in areas like in Latin America or Central Asia or other places where there is a lot of traditional knowledge that is shared through generations, and that would be stopped if the rural population goes to urban areas. And what we are developing is this GOSA approach. The GOSA approach, which is the acronym for governance of water and land through sustainable sanitation, what is looking for is to integrate at the local level, the watershed level, the water sources level, to integrate into local actors related to water. In the cases we have been working with is basically through water supply and sanitation committees. So they have been incorporating new functions in their activities, like water resources planning, land planning, in addition to the administration of the infrastructure related to water supply and sanitation. So what we were working on through this is to create a more holistic intervention of our local actor at the community level. So this would imply, with their approval and with their participation and with their legitimate decisions, their institutional transformations to become not only have a physical approach on how to plan a watershed, but also to have a more environmental, social, and political approach. So what we're building now in Peru, in this headwater territory, is water supply and sanitation committees that have integrated the water resources planning and land planning to have a more holistic intervention. So since we're working now with several communities in this headwater territory, the next step that we're working on now is to create watershed authority. Not only combined with this indigenous population, but also with other actors like universities and local authorities. So this is what we did in Peru. We're currently working with 120 families, public consultation for the river basin, watershed, water and sanitation infrastructure, because it's very important. How can we tell people to conserve water if they don't have water in their homes? And they were working themselves with our assistance in land planning, in water resources planning, in transform their institutionality, and to use these resources and decisions to influence other decisions at the local and other levels. What we're working now is in Central Asia. We're in the planning process in Tajikistan and also in Moldova. The situation is very different. The kind of governments are very different. So we're working now with the Citizens District Committee in a project that the International Secretariat for Water is carrying on in Tajikistan with 8,500 families. So our plan is to work with the mixed consultation table and the district administration through the Citizens District Committee to develop this agenda: water supply and sanitation, water resources management, and a land management proposal that would go to the region, to the oblast, through mainly women and youth leadership that would strengthen the governance and would keep these people conducting their own development and their own destiny. In Moldova, in the Nirnova River Basin, the Solidarity Water Europe has been working in conforming a mayors association, which is the mayors of a basin getting together to plan and to make decisions together. So we are planning and to also introduce this approach, this GOES approach in this area through the projects we are developing, combining water resources planning, water sanitation and master plan through a consultation process and the land management proposal, which is more complex in this situation because in this case, the organizations that approve those decisions are separated. No, this is the basin management organization, the local authority, and the region and the region and the local land planning they have in charge. So this GOES approach, what it's trying to do is not to replace basis management and neither to replace local planning or local development. What it's doing is working as an interface between local development and basis planning, considering a mainstreaming approach. You know? And where this combination of elements, you know, water supply, community, water resources, zoning, and governance are combined to create a new institutionality that strengthens a lot the decision-making process and has a very wider impact on communities' wealth. So as conclusions and to finish, water and sanitation programs are an excellent door to enter into sustainable infrastructure, to land and water governance. Water management can also be strengthened by reinforcing the capacity of these small water and sanitation committees. So this is a key validated aspect that we've done in South America. And also hydrological resilience is better promoted with community and local organizations leading water governance in the absence of the states. Because which is happening in developing countries, in many cases the state is absent. And this GOS approach makes an excellent connection and interface between the local development and basis management. And also something I wanted to say is that this GOS approach proves that mainstreaming several sectors and interventions like water supply and sanitation, water conservation and land management has a wider impact in people's wealth. So this is everything I wanted to say. I remain at your disposal if you have any questions, or we can talk later. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie, Vladimir. Vous avez montré qu'à travers...
Thank you, Vladimir. You have shown that through your experience, we still have a couple of minutes to finalize the answer to the poll. And before that, we're going to be closing in a couple of minutes. I'm going to give the floor to Laurie Fourneau, and he's going to be chairing our Q&A session.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Laronde. Merci également aux grands témoins pour ces présentations inspirantes.
The great witnesses, and I give the floor to you now. I see your questions in the chat. We have already received several questions already. I'm now going to give the floor so that you can ask yourselves your questions. Thank you for being brief. We have about 20 minutes for a Q&A session to allow the highest number of speakers to ask the question. And please feel free to switch off your microphone after. For Mr. Laboranti, it was in Spanish. It was for Mr. Jean-Bosco Bazié. This has to do with the cost of the meetings, consultation meetings, and there were costs to these consultation meetings, and he was asking what were the funding or the financing sources to hold these meetings. What have the financing sources been? Are you with us? Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for your question, which is very relevant and to the point. And I think that in one of the lessons and also the constraints that I have highlighted in my presentation, there is, as a matter of fact, the constraints of financing of these meetings, because the participation means financial means to take place. And in both cases of the Niger River Basin and the Senegal River Basin, and the two experiences, the processes, participatory source processes have been supported by the technical and financial partners of river basin organizations, and the French cooperation and the German cooperation and the Canadian development agencies have supported the participatory project process on the river basin. And as a matter of fact, the meetings, the consultations go with a price and a cost, including for technical assistance and the expertise, the technical assistance that we have brought, and we've done so within the framework of the river basin. We've also had the Water Secretariat, the World Water Secretariat, who has participated and has been a mediator, and that has costs associated to it. On the basis of the river basin of Senegal, it was a very technically demanding expertise with the engineering in France and the all the teams that have developed the methods and designed the tools also to be able to support, consult, guide, and extend the choice in water management and sanitation. Also, these are technical studies that are very, very hefty and requires a lot of engineering, but we have to make that digest for the layman, for the layman populations, not understanding French or English, also understand the ins and outs and the state of play and the challenges, the resort of the sector, the master plans, how the water needs evolve over 10 years' time, and how the climate change have an impact on the resources and the degradation of resources one generation after the other, and how we can react. And that certainly requires begs for money, and this money will be the framework of the River Basin Senegal. It is the French Development Agency that has financed the process, the participatory process of the design and the involvement of the population in designing and extending the master plan. This mission was entrusted to Burial Engineering and the Vive teams, and myself, who acted as an expert of Burial Engineering. So, and it is true, it is an important question. Yeah, the participation comes with a cost. The participation begs for means, and the state and the River Basin Organization must include these costs in the running operational cost of River Basin organizations. And I think it was exactly the meeting was a venue to promote this. And when we have a budget of River Basin's budget, we should not forget to put the cost factor of participation, consultation of people. Thank you, Jean-Bosco, for the strong message. I think you have been heard. I'm now going to give the floor to Mr. Penda Ziop from the Senegal. If she is connected, I'll give her the floor. Yeah, good afternoon, Laurie. Thank you for recognizing the floor to me. And I would like to commend all the speakers and the panelists. My question has to do with how are the economic usages of water being managed? My question is to Mrs. Isabelle, because I see that you, Mrs. Isabelle Howell, had talked about the economic uses. There was a graph where we had the economic uses of water, and it appears more and more too difficult, and hence the resources must be used at different scales, and the evolution of each use also has an impact on the resource. I would like to know how the economic usages of water are being managed. My other question is to Mr. Bosco. You have been saying that there are regulations governing the users of water, and the regulations are more and more diverse and multi-tiers. The water users, there is an extremely big and heavy regulations, and all these rules tend to build up, and these rules also tend to build up over time or to become more numerous. How do the users take ownership of this regulation, and how do the users, and how do we make sure that the users really understand these regulations? And I would like also to know, of course, whether the user is only avoid congestions of users, because it is in interest of all the users to be participating actors and to have more access to information and to knowledge in the local areas. I don't want to be too long. Thank you. Please. Thank you. I'm now going to give the floor to Mrs. Matykowski to answer your first question, and very, very, very briefly to Mr. Bosco afterward. Thank you for us to be able to give the possibility to others to react. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much for the question on the economic users. I have several levels of answers to your question, but I would like to highlight that in the River Basin committees, you have said so, they are represented at the scale. We have also the small water parliaments where they're represented, and they represent different forms of pressure on the advocacy, industrial, agricultural pressures, household pressures, because we have also the local governments and the elected representatives who are also sitting in a River Basin committees, not to mention the other uses related to water. So they are fully part and parcel of the decision-making and planning of the main topics, and they are fully part and parcel of the good and sound sharing of water. Now, why am I saying this? By way of example, now I'm going to refer to the rarefaction and the paucity of water resources. Today, up to and including in France and in the northern part of France, we are being impacted. And we have therefore to anticipate this type of subjects in terms of depleting of water resources, starting from an image of the uses of water at the river basin level, as well as projections and prospects for the years to come in relation to the impacts caused by climate change. We will be having a debate and a system to have a good and fair distribution of water resources, which is the result of the consultation of all the players. We're going to do it at the basin level, but also in the sub-basin scale in a very shared manner, because lest we commit the debate with all of the stakeholders, what would happen is that every partner would like to have all the water and only for itself. So this is a debate which is based on concrete data in relation to the regeneration capacity of water, quantitative management, and this is how we can, I think, we can have a frank, straightforward, non-stigmatizing one category of users, and it is by talking about these different uses that are the very bedrock of the good governance of water that will be able to involve all these economic users in an reasoned, equitable sharing of water. I hope that I have answered your question, and if it was the gist of your question. But anyway, I have given you I have shed light on some of the quantitative aspects of your question. Thank you, Mrs. Latrovsky. I'm now going to Mr. Bosco. Would you like to answer in less than 1 minute to the second question? I'm not sure to have really understood well, but I imagine that she was referring to the complexity of the enactment and the different regulations. Yes, as a matter of fact, for the case of uses, we do have the water charter on the river, the Niger River Basin that has been designed with, of course, all and everything that this charter of water comprises regulations-wise for the different users, for the withdrawals, etc., etc. And it is exactly rightly so that this mechanism exists that makes it possible for the users to sit in the permanent committees, technical committee, and the experts technical committees, and to also attend as or in their capacity of advisory board meetings with the ministers, and it gives the opportunity for them to say a word, to have a say, to have their opinion being heard. Now they need to know first what is it about, and this work, of course, we're talking about here technical assistance, because these regulations are not really very only legal, and it is the basic community users back in the forests who really need to understand that, and this is why they need technical assistance to be able to really understand the legal implications that are upstream all of these regulations. Thank you, Jean-Bosco.
Podemos pasar a
But
otra
I think there
pregunta.
were also another
¿Teníamos
question
alguna
from Mr.
pregunta
Bazié.
más?
There was a question for Mrs. Sharipova.
Teníamos una pregunta para la señora Sharipova
And once
también.
again,
Una
it is
pregunta de
Mr. Kimini Cambo's
señor
question. I don't know whether he
Jiménez
is
Campo.
attending with
No
us
sé
or
si
listening
está
to
con
us.
nosotros.
Well, the question on the
Era una pregunta
PPP,
sobre el
public-private
partenariado
partnerships
público-privado,
that could
participación
facilitate
público-privada.
the management of river basin. I don't know whether
No sé
Mrs.
si la señora
Sharipova is
Sharipova
with us
puede
and
responder.
whether you can cater for that question.
That was a question for public-private
c'était
partnership.
Era una pregunta sobre la colaboración
Yes,
público-privada,
exactly,
¿verdad?
Madam
Sí,
Sharipova,
correcto.
that question. In respect
Para
to
la gestión
basin
de
management.
cuencas.
Yeah, I'm sorry because there's 2 translations in the channel of English.
Es que tengo dos traducciones en el canal
Spanish and
inglés,
English.
español e inglés.
I would just try to answer because this is still not working in Central Asian region, the region where I'm from, and therefore I'm not
Esto
sure
no
I am
siempre
really
funciona
capable
en
to answer this
todas las
question.
regiones y no siempre es posible responder.
Well, what you're telling us, Mrs. Sharipova, what you are telling us, Mrs. Sharipova, is...
Yeah, sorry, I was just telling that I don't know about the cases of public and private partnership.
Que no conozco casos
from
de colaboración público-privada en la región de Asia Central,
what's maybe as an example, I could just say,
como ejemplo, sí puedo decir
from the region that there was
desde el punto de vista de la región que había un partenariado, hay un partenariado en Kazajistán, en la cuenca de Kazajistán, para hacer investigaciones científicas de forma conjunta, financiadas por las organizaciones comerciales, por diferentes industrias y sectores, las diferentes
water resources of the basin. And therefore we have some successful cases, but they are very small yet. And this is something very new to Kazakhstan, as far as I know.
Es algo muy novedoso en Kazajistán, por lo que sé.
Mrs. Sharipova, thank you very much for your answer. I'm now going to give one last question before the conclusion. Mrs. Shirin Ghanem. I don't know, Mrs. Shirin Ghanem is with us. She has just sent a question. Yes, bonjour. I'm sorry, I have not heard who your question was to. Thank you, thank you. Now, Jean-Bosco, one very last question to you. Are you with us, Mr. Jean-Bosco? Are you still with us? Votre micro, Monsieur Bosco, si vous êtes des nôtres. Sorry, I was saying that the reason d'etre for the River Basins Organization is to organize this management, both for the countries who are on the main water courses of the rivers, but also hinterland. The case of Niger River Basin is a case in point, is 1,200 kilometers and which crosses 9 countries. The river and all of its affluents, it's 9 countries. And at the same time, the degradation of the river and or its protection is not only of interest and concern for those countries along which the river passes, and the River Basin Organization is important. You have countries that are upstream, you have others that are downstream, and an ill upstream management is going to create a problem downstream. And therefore, all of these countries have to agree on building technical works, and as we have the case of the Senegal River Basin that has also common works, and they have put common means, financial means, to build the dams and the works, and they share the benefits. Hence, the very good importance of having, at the scale of all countries, the sustainable development and management, rather, of the basin. And this is the raison d'etre and the rationale for a river basin organization. And this is where the organization and management can and must be well done for everyone, for those upstream and those downstream and those who are on the main water course, but also those hinterland who are hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers from the water course, the main water course, and whose activities have an impact and adversely affect the basin in all its entirety. Thank you very much, Jean-Bosco. Unfortunately, this was all the time that we have for this Q&A session. Many other questions have been asked, shared on the chat box, but unfortunately, we will invite you and call you to contact directly the speakers and to continue informal exchange with the other participants. Now I'm going to give the floor to Madam Antonella Cagnolati, the chair of the International Secretariat for Water for Europe, and Mr. Eric Tardieu, Secretary General for RIAB, for their respective, Mrs. Cagnolati for their respective conclusions. Over to you, Madam.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Before everything, well, thank you to Eric for hosting us. I said I was going to see and to say all I needed to say without really using Eric's time and speech. I wanted to react to Jean-Bosco's intervention earlier on, not to overlook that the water resources management, river or whatever other resources, is located in the middle of a territory. And this really has increasing value. When he talks about the fact that the river can be far away and remote, let us not forget that this is a territory with activities and interactions between the river and the remaining activities and vice versa. And if I may, I'd like to have a private conversation with Isabelle, and I'd like to really convey my warmest congratulations to the water agency of Picardie for the very important, two important things. The gender equality participation, this is absolutely paramount for the water resources management, and for what she said in her last answer and response in terms of balance between the different players and stakeholders and the conditions that need to be put in place in order to guarantee a constructive dialogue and oppose any category oppositions and confrontations. And also convey my congratulations to the agency for its youth policy. Maybe send a message and hear our voice heard. We want all other French water agencies to do the same, to kind of conduct a water agency, a French water agency action for French, or for youth rather, a national action for youth that could gain the same momentum as the one put in place by the Picardie agency. That would be a great thing for the French water agencies and for youth participation. It would be a beautiful, a wonderful showcasing and example to give. And something that struck me in Bota's intervention, she really pinpointed something or two things rather that are absolutely important, something that is structural in her region, reminding that the conditions are structurally difficult to ensure an effective and active and interactive participation of youth. And I believe that there are indeed significant kind of obstacles. Now, in a country where the youth associations are missing or weak, she spoke about capacity building, but also the fluidity of the youth or intergenerational transmission. We talk about it in our movement, and sometimes youth might pass by and just leave and not show up again. And this is something very important in Central Asian countries, and this is important, and it is important that we structure the brain gain of youth. And I'm very, very happy, lastly, to have heard Mr. Ortiz's presentation, Mr. Bosco's presentation, and Vladimir's presentation. It really shows clearly that since Rio, where we started talking about the integrated management of water resources, there has been a movement since then towards the participatory management. Jean-Bosco spoke about it earlier on, about the notion of participation that is sometimes very difficult. It's complex for different reasons. And something in Mr. Ortiz's presentation that really struck me and really pleased me when he spoke about appropriation, ownership. And I think that where the shoe pinches about participation, and I can see it in our projects, not only for civil society, but also for elected members and local elected members, is the issue of ownership of this participation, how to gain ownership over this
Hola, esta es una prueba en el canal de inglés para ver si entra el español. Probando 1, 2, 1, 2.
Concrete, and can bring about tangible actions and achievements. Well, participation is a trivial world, talking about participation of civil society that shouldn't be an alibi kind of participation like women's participation. But what we need to do is give the possibility to these interlocutors and counterparts of governance that are absolutely paramount to implement effectively a solidary democracy. And these people need to have the tools and instruments to do so and to enforce this participation. And this is why in the poll, I gave priority and preference to the first step. We need to train governance, players, and actors. We need to bet on and focus on capacity building for these people, for these stakeholders and players to be able to act and act actively. This, in addition to the political will that was highlighted earlier on, Jean-Bosco spoke about it, Mr. Ortiz referred to it. Apparently, there is a political will out there, and this political will can make a change and can be even more interactive with the local interlocutors and counterparts that really have the capacity and the knowledge to ensure and enforce this participation. So I will stop here. I could go on for hours because this is so passionate, but I can see that Eric is not very happy, so I'll stop here for the sake of time. And once again, I would like us to focus on capacity building of the actors of this governance. So they're the only ones who can make a change and who can bring about a solidary, effective, and democratic action. Thank you, and participation. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much, Antonella. On these closing words, Mr. Tardieu, you have the closing remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Antonella, and thank you to all of you, dear participants. I would like to start these concluding remarks with my thanks to our speakers for their very rich presentations. It seems that almost everything has already been done and said here, so I'm quite aware that this job of mine is not the easiest job there is to conclude. But still, what are the main messages that we should take away from this webinar? To begin with, I would like to mention the handbook, the manual that the International Network of Basin Organizations published back in 2018 on this very important topic, the participation of stakeholders and the representatives of civil society in river, lake, and aquifer basin organization. This manual is available free of charge on the INBO website, and it provides a set of recommendations quite similar to those that have been provided throughout our webinar today. We have found throughout this webinar that it is useful to put in place innovations and new approaches for participatory basin management. My first conclusion is actually quite simple, but I still wanted to start with this. The presentations and the questions that you have asked have confirmed that the scale of hydrographic basin is absolutely relevant, and basin organizations have demonstrated their effectiveness in the implementation of this participatory management. The basin organizations are therefore institutions that are really important. And it is essential, in my view, to confirm the strengths of these basin agencies, to provide them with more means and to develop their capacity building. They naturally work with a multitude of local and regional players. These institutions are tools of governance, but not only governance, they are also tools of sound participatory basin management. There are, above all, three main messages that I would like to convey in these conclusions. The first message would be, participation should not seek to please any particular interest group or community, but it should instead aim to facilitate decision-making processes. It is therefore essential to choose wisely the representatives who must engage in participatory management. It is also essential that the actors involved know the different uses of water that are important at basin level, and that they recognize the relevance of the representativeness of the different communities. And finally, it is essential to integrate them into the participatory management of water resources, to build this pattern of shared responsibility, but also to develop a climate of trust. This is something that we often repeat in our different activities, that we often promote. Trust is one of the key terms we've heard throughout our webinar repeatedly, and we do think it's important to build a climate of trust through this participatory management of water resources. The second message is participation should not seek to preach a theoretical balance between stakeholders, but it should instead aim to achieve strong and effective consultation mechanisms. I often stress this importance of establishing transparency mechanisms based on a climate of trust and on information systems, the data sharing, for instance. It is essential to share information between the different type of actors and stakeholders, both public authorities, of course, but also local communities. We are all very aware, I think, that there is a certain complexity inherent to these consultative processes, and it's true. We also know that there is a territorial and spatial complexity between the national and local levels and their respective actors. And of course we can go beyond that. We know that national authorities do not necessarily set up this type of consultation mechanism, and this is even less often the case at transboundary level. It is therefore essential to build consultation processes. And thirdly, my third key message would be, participation should not seek to complement existing administrative and regulatory frameworks, as well as already established organizations. It should instead aim to implement fair decisions with broad mobilization of all of the stakeholders. This is another element that has been repeated over and over again. We know that the degree of participatory management heavily depends on both national cultural factors, political stances, and also on a complex and sensitive context, such as transboundary basins. There is this need for shared ownership, that's for sure, and the sense of ownership of integrated water resource management processes. At the political level, in particular among decision makers, whether they are local elected officials or water resource managers working in the field. It is important that participatory and consultative processes can lead to shared possibilities for the effective implementation of the measures and decisions taken. These three key messages, these three principles are, in my opinion, decisive elements for the sustainability and effectiveness of integrated management approaches. Two other considerations that I would like to include in my concluding remarks. First of all, we had a strong interest in the different participatory management approaches you have presented. And a small parenthesis, we are going to take a family photo during my last 2 minutes, and I invite you to activate your webcams, and Edward will take the photos. One small minute of self-promotion, finally, on the INBO activities for next year. I will here limit myself to mention 2 activities at this stage. First, a first webinar will be organized in February with our UNEC colleagues, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. It will be an online meeting of the global network of basins working on climate change. There is a possibility for organizations that are not yet part of this network to participate in the event and express their interest in joining the network. Another important activity, probably in May, will be the publication of a manual dedicated to establish a city basin dialogue, and this is another way of organizing consultation and coordination processes between cities this time and basins. This will surely be the subject of another webinar also in May. That's it for me. I believe that Edward is now taking the family pictures. I would like to thank again all of the speakers. Thank you for your brilliant interventions. I would like to thank our participants. Thank you for your relevant questions. We will try to summarize all of this and disseminate these different elements in the coming months. I wish you a happy end to this year, a year that has been difficult, a time that has impacted our regions, our countries, our lives. We were delighted to have you all with us at this webinar, and thank you to our colleagues from the International Secretariat for Water. We were delighted to host this webinar with you. Thank you very much, and see you next year